Hello all, welcome to study 74 of the Solving Studies to Improve Chess Calculation series. This interesting study comes from the famous Josef Vančura, Czechoslovakian chess composer that died very young at only with 23 years old. But he is famous from the Vančura position. If you aren't following my end game on Rook and Games, the Vančura position was already covered. It's a very important position for that kind of end games. But besides that, in the short period of his life, he was able to produce around 60 endgame studies that I really find it very interesting, and I can't imagine how much more he could produce if he had lived longer, which unfortunately was not the situation. For this endgame study, as always, I suggest you check the guide if you haven't, so you are better prepared during the practice. And as always, after the countdown, I'll reach you back with a solution. And here we are, and as always, let's start with the first move, which is, of course, we need to promote the pawn to a queen, sacrificing the queen, so the rook can take the queen, and then I can use the bishop to block the access to the g8 square, so threatening to promote the g pawn. Uh, of course, if we want to win, we need also start to think, how can I win this one? I have two pawns to promote, but again, the rook is controlling them very well, and the king also is able to reach the pawns very fast. So one simple possibility for black is to bring the king next to one pawn, then go with the rook to the other, take that pawn, and then come back and grab the other, so to reach the draw. And this is very important. Let's say, for example, I start with the king g3. I can see that in action immediately. So I can bring my king. Then if the king approaches the pawn, okay, it's protecting one pawn. But then I keep bringing my king. And notice how after this position, it's very easy to understand that it's impossible to promote any pawn if this one promotes the rook takes. So I will take this one, or if the bishop protects, I can simply sacrifice the bishop takes and then I take the other. So the pawns are lost, and this is simply a draw. Without being able to use the king again, I should think, okay, how I can do something about this. And again, if the bishop is blocking the access to the pawns, this is perfect. If it's here, okay, I can have it for the g pawn. Another possible solution is to bring the bishop over here, so I can then promote g pawn, and after bishop f8, after the rook takes on g8, and then promote the pawn and so on. But of course, this would be slower, so I need to think fast, and the easiest way is to sacrifice this pawn, the rook takes, and I get the desired block. And now it's black to play. And again, I need to go and think about the defense. And the defense is the same idea. I want to at least be able to sacrifice my rook for the g pawn. And to do that, I need to be fast, because over here I have some checks. And the idea is, if the king comes to g3, well, that's an interesting position, as I will be able to play this interesting rook e6, as if I promote the pawn to a queen, then I can check and of course force the queen to take it, but the pawn is protecting the rook, so it's again another draw. So after this check, white is simply forced to move up. It's the only way able to progress. If it goes down, well, I simply can check again, and then moving on, we don't leave over here. So going up is the situation. So I go up again, check again. The king reaches this interesting position, and now, of course, I will play check. But if I play, for example, rook e1, well, this is already easier for white, because I can remove the bishop with a tempo, checking the king, so the king moves. And now notice how I am controlling the square, so I can promote to a queen. And now the idea from black is to check the king, and when the king comes to the g file, check it again to grab the rook, to grab the queen in the other side. But here we simply block it with the bishop, and it's not possible to take it anyway, because the position is already controlled by white. If the rook delivers another check, okay, I go over again, and now the rook needs to find a way, again, going down to the same situation. So the idea is to check the king if the pawn promotes, and then check it again on the g file. Of course, here white won't promote, because if it promotes, then check and I get the queen, and as you can see, it's a draw. So because white can't promote now, needs to find another solution, and the idea is, the rook is threatening to check and then come back to g1. So let's start with bishop c5. So here I am blocking the rook from accessing the g1 square, so threatening again to promote. But of course, now the rook comes back, and okay, how I can progress with this? Because if I try, well, to go with the bishop again. Then the rook just, if I try this one, okay, so the rook comes back and there's no progress. So over here, what I do is simple. I advance with the king. So notice how the rook can't move inside, so needs to come to d8. Notice that if the rook comes to c8, it's already easier for white. We are going to see that in a while. But let's say the rook goes to the best situation, d8. Then I need to keep protecting the pawn, because another threat over here is to go with the rook to d7 and then pinning the pawn so I can't promote it. And next move, the rook takes the pawn and it's again a draw. So going over here is a mistake because of this move. If I can't go over here, I need to find a better solution, and it's to go with the bishop e7, because at the same time we are blocking the rook from accessing directly the pawn, so I can promote in the next move if the rook goes to d7. Of course, the rook now is forced to move, goes to c8. Remember when the bishop was here and I told you that we are going to see rook c8 again, so here it's the same idea. And now I can protect the pawn, because after the rook comes with the same trick of pinning the pawn, well, now it doesn't work, because it's our time to pin the rook, win the rook, and then promote it and win the position, win the study, win the game. Okay, it was harder probably than what you expected, because there were a lot of details from the defense. This is the hardest part in solving studies alone. So sometimes this kind of studies are easier with someone helping us to try the solutions that we are not covering. What if the rook goes to e1? What if the rook goes to d8? What if the rook then goes to d7, and so on? That helps to find better ways to improve. Okay, I hope you have enjoyed, and as always, I see you in future studies. Bye bye.